Hey everyone, welcome to FF Squared, where we talk about fantasy football and future finances. Um, Today, Jesse and we're going to talk about one of the best things about the fantasy football community, the Scott Fish Bowl. Um, if you don't know what the Scott Fish Bowl is, we're going to give you the breakdown here shortly about this absolutely amazing tournament that Scott Fish runs. Luckily, today there's no finance talks, so we're not going to play the disclaimer at all today. so, but let's talk about this tournament with the charity tournament with Scott Fishbowl.
Yeah, so the Scott Fish Bowl might be the biggest fantasy tournament in the industry. Like it has an insane amount of people. I think last year there were 2,800. I might be misquoting that, but there was a ridiculous amount of people in this tournament. It is big time. It's anybody who's anybody is in this tournament. You get people where like that are actually involved in like in industry like ourselves, where they'll be in the tournament. You have content creators from different apps. You have like famous musicians, and you have a lot of people who just love fantasy football. But the goal for Scott Fish is charity. Like that's what he organized, what it is. So he uses Fantasy Cares, and they try to generate enough money for donations throughout the year. So it raises a massive amount of money, and it's a great cause where you bring people together to celebrate fantasy football and donations for kids and helping them out. So it's a win-win for everybody. But if you dive into it this year, we're in I think this is the 13th year of Scott Fish Bowl because it's SFB 13.
Yep.
What it basically is you have all these divisions where you get certain divisions and there's themes or formats. This year it's brands, so it's pretty interesting. So you have like a Heinz division, you have Coca-Cola division, you have all these big name brands that's synonymous in the industry. Like basically whatever company you can think of, they're likely a division. I saw the live division in Atlanta is like Coca-Cola. So some of them are
Nice.
local to the area, right? And things like that.
Right.
And there's all this. There was Fantasy Cares is doing a lot of events to get people in. Like yesterday, they wanted people to do their best air bugle for the bugles division. So basically people were just wailing away on their fake trumpet bugles, which I was a part of, but that was pretty interesting. Or they had people had to eat pickles, and anybody who knows Scott Fish knows he hates pickles, but there is a pickles division. So they were like, don't tell Scott, but we're having people eat pickles and stuff like that. So it's just a lot of fun. Everyone comes together. You get these teams of draft slots, so everybody gets a 1 through 12 draft slot, and they'll talk strategy, trying to come up with the best plan for you to win the Scottish Fish Bowl, which, by the way, it's pretty much impossible because there's so many teams. So we all go in with the hope we're going to win, but realistically, like you have to have a lot of luck. It all has to break in your favor. Injuries could nuke you. Like last year, I had Cup, and when he went down, my team was like, "All right, we're out. It's not going to work for me." So be a part of it, right? So you have to. It's not just skill. There's a lot of luck involved too. So you have to survive, and then with the people that win their divisions, they all get put into a big tournament. So I think it's like almost 800 people, like maybe 900, somewhere in that range. Or actually, it might be 1,300. I'm not sure. But they make it into the playoffs, and then it just starts chopping people down each week. So each week you advance, it gets the narrow and smaller. So you get these just juggernaut teams in the finals. And then there is, I want to say it's week 17 is the final week, where they have basically the best scores. It's just a heck of a lot of fun. And we're on the Scott Fish Bowl website. So if you don't know what it is, just go to scottfishbowl.com. You can look it up. If you haven't signed up, they're still taking submissions. So if you want to join in, happily join in. They have all the divisions right here. If you want to do slow draft, which everyone can do. And we'll click on some of these. But like right here, you see they have the 7-Up logo. You go down, you see the 7-Eleven logo. So kind of give you an idea of just all the fun divisions that they have. But yeah, it's just a lot of fun. And some of them are pretty open, like the Albertsons division. There's nobody in there. So if you got in, you could get into that division. But yeah, that's kind of just a quick breakdown on the Scott Fish Bowl. We do have some fun actual data to dive into. So I'm going to let Prue talk about the data aspect of it, of like a good way to strategize your draft with Scott Fish Bowl.
Yeah, before we get into the data, what Scott has been recently been doing is he's been increasing the number of live drafts. And you could do a slow draft or you could go to a live draft. I think those are filling up pretty fast here.
Mm-hmm.
And I luckily got into the Philly one, so obviously there's like the Philly brands are all the different cheesesteaks in Philly. So funny story. So I grew up vegetarian, and up until a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, I was vegetarian, and I started eating meat 3 years ago. I have not tried a cheesesteak yet. So the first time I'm going to try a cheesesteak is at this live draft.
That is absolutely wild. Well, I think you're going to be in for a treat because Philly is known for the cheesesteak. So if there's one place to get it, you're in the right area to do it. So are you?
Right.
So you're driving down for the event, I'm assuming, right? Since you're doing the Philly live draft.
Yep, it's going to be July 9th, which is a Sunday at Xfinity Live right outside the stadium.
That's awesome. That's going to be a lot of fun. Like that's just going to be great.
Yeah.
How many live drafts are going on in Philly at that time?
Minimum 3. There might be a fourth one. I can't recall if there's a fourth one or not.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun in the live Seattle draft last year. They're not doing one this year, which is a little disappointing, but you know, that's part of it. I know, but we had a lot of fun last year. It was just like the live draft. If anybody can ever get into a live draft, they are incredible. The way they do it is they're going to be on Sleeper. Some of the slow drafts are going to be on the My Fantasy League. But basically, you do the first 12 rounds live, and then after that, you finish off the draft like basically online. So it's just a fun way to kickstart the drafts. You get the full body experience where you can boo each other, cheer for each other, just rally, like just have a lot of fun and get together, just play fantasy football with friends. So yeah, that's what it's all about.
Yeah, and if you're in a city and where there's a live draft and you're not part of the draft, just go and have a good time.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it's all about. And I think the first time I actually read about Scott Fishbowl, and I had no idea I was reading about it, was I used to religiously read Matthew Berry's stats article on ESPN. And I think in one of the intros he had talked about Scott Fishbowl, and I thought that was cool. A couple of years later, I joined Twitter and actually start learning about the Scott Fishbowl, and I'm like, oh wow, that was like I read about that 2 years ago.
Right. Yeah. I was like, the first year I even got into the satellite, which was like 3 or 4 years ago. I was so pumped even just to get into the satellite event. I was like, yes, like it's just everybody, like nobody, like all my friends were like, dude, what the heck's Scott Fishbowl? And I'm like, all right, now I gotta explain what this is to everybody. But like people that are industry, it's like, yeah, people on the outside are like, what is it? I'm like, just come on in. It's fun. It's a blast. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. So, and before we get into the data, we're going to talk about, what Jesse said. You want to score points, and you want to score lots of points. Yes. And Scott does an amazing job of changing the scoring year in and year out to try to add value to a certain position or make it different from, other normal leagues. And then you have the whole tournament aspect, right? You have like 3,500 participants, and 50% of them make them into the playoff in like week 13 or 14.
Yeah,
right. And then your regular season score average is added to your playoff score that week. So you definitely want to make sure that in the regular season you're scoring as many points as possible, because that's going to help you advance. Last year, right after the Scott Fishbowl, I did an article on the league winners from data that a friend of mine at Mr. Aladdin, and we're going to put it in the link below. It showed what players made up most of the teams that advanced into the playoffs or were the division winners, and then which players help teams go further in the playoffs every week. And I think it's an interesting article to see, how in the regular season, if you had the likes of Mahomes and Kelsey and Allen, you had that high floor of points that helped you advance.
Yeah, I think on the flip side, the guy that hurt people the most was Kyle Pitts, because he was going in that second or third round and he was just a disaster because it's such a heavy tight end premium scoring format. Like it was just, so I was looking at that a little bit last year, and it was just like Kyle Pitts was just a bomb to your team. Like if you took Kyle Pitts, you were not advancing. But if you took like Mahomes, or actually Jalen Hurts was one of the biggest advancers because of how good he was and how late he was going last year, right? Exactly. And Geno Smith, some guys like that, like there were guys that were massive values.
Yeah, I'm still kicking myself for picking Russell Wilson over Jalen Hurts at the 108.
I passed on Justin Fields for freaking Matt Ryan last year in the Scott Fishbowl. I was like, he's safe. Like, there's a floor with him, and then it just like eroded because that negative like incompletions. Like I let it get to my head. I was like, I want a guy that completes passes, and then Matt Ryan couldn't complete any passes last year. It was just a disaster.
Right, especially last year where there was negative points for incompletions.
Yeah, it's brutal.
I actually took Fields, but my problem with Fields was the first half of the season, he was atrocious.
Yep.
And I had Wilson as my other quarterback, so it didn't help.
That's a double dip of just terror.
Right.
Yeah. I had Josh Allen, I had Cooper Kupp. So I had like two of the better guys, but then once Kupp went out, I was just heavily dependent on Allen, and he could not carry me to the playoffs. I missed it by like 50 points. So I was like, so yeah, just did not go well for me last year, but that's all right.
Do you want to talk about some of the changes in the scoring this year before we go into some of the data?
Yeah, so I'll pull it up right here. Actually, let me go to the scoring real quick. So it's pretty interesting this year if you go to scoring. So the biggest differential is quarterback scoring. They don't have the negative points for incompletion. So if you had someone who was like getting 59% of the completions, they were killing you. This year, he's gotten rid of it completely. And it's also pretty interesting because we're doing 1 point like per reception, which before it was half point per reception. So that's a big change as well. He added in the 0.25 points per carry. So guys who see a lot of volume, like the Josh Jacobs, Derrick Henry, they get a boost as well this year. So it's pretty interesting to see the changes. The tight end scoring is just insane this year. It's a full point per reception and a full point per first down. So say you get like a 20-point completion to a tight end. That's basically 5 points right there. Like just
that's
right
6
there.
points.
6. Oh yeah, 6 because the next point. Yeah, that's right. So you think about that, and it's just like, dude, that's just monster scoring. So that's why Travis Kelce is being talked about as going possibly the 101. And I've seen that in basically mocks where everybody's taking there. It makes sense because he's such an advantage at the position. And with this scoring format, he's just like drastically above every other tight end, even Andrews, like Pitts, Goddard, Hawkinson. It doesn't matter. Like he's just in a whole nother tier. So he's getting taken above like Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. And we'll talk about with the scoring format, like how much of a cheat code Allen is with this format. Actually pretty interesting. Just the way it is, because you're getting the rushing bonus from Allen where you get points for rushing first downs and yards and touchdowns, and along with the passing. So there are some guys that this scoring is very much designed for. And it's like Travis Kelce, it's the elite quarterbacks, and it's these volume rushers that also catch passes. So if you have a guy like Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, those guys, like they're going to score a lot of points for you this year. So it does kind of tweak how you normally do drafts, but that's what makes Scott Fishbowl great. It's not the same. Depending on the format, where sleeper, you have a kicker. On my fantasy league and stuff like that, you're going to be able to flex kickers like you could previously. So the kicking is pretty interesting. It's 3.3 points for an extra point. It's a little bit different. And there's no negative points for kickers. So if you have an inaccurate kicker, it's not the biggest deal in the world as it was last year. It's just kickers and good offense is what you want. So like anybody who's a good offense that has a little bit of a problem scoring touchdowns, like those guys are going to be a bonus. So it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm pretty excited to see like how the changes go and how we expect it to go based on the scoring. Like, do we expect all of these guys, like for instance, Josh Jacobs, is he going to get that workload he had last year? And is he going to be a top 5 running back in this format? It's a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. And I loved Scott Fish's explanation of why he did this, right? He wanted no negative points. He just wanted to indulge in points, similarly how we indulged in a lot of these restaurant brands and food product brands. So that was the whole theme there. And I absolutely loved it. But Jesse brings up great points that, you definitely want the elite quarterbacks, you want the elite tight ends, and then you want volume. You want volume as much as possible.
I think it's gonna be fun. Well, because like a lot of people are so wide receiver heavy, and how they view wide receivers currently in like dynasty and redraft, you go on wide receivers are going insanely early and insanely high. But with these scoring settings, like it's not the best for wide receiver. So I think that's going to be interesting to see how much of a change a Scott Fishbowl draft has compared to your traditional, just like your 12-team draft on ESPN, right? Like you're going to see ideally massive fluctuations in those ADPs.
Yeah, and the data we're about to present was made possible by the fantasy football content creators. There are several of them out there that are posting data. They've taken stats from previous years and put out scoring. Aligned the scoring to the Scott Fishbowl 13 scoring, and that's where we're pulling the data. And we'll definitely link all of their content in the description below. But definitely a huge shout out to all of them, and it's because of their works. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants
Right.
here with
Like,
this data.
yeah, that Scott, or sorry, Prue just took the work and he's like, guess what? I'm going to just change it a little bit. So yeah, like this is Prue's work that he used off of like Wyatt and Andrew Cooper and a bunch of other guys in the industry. Like we took their data and then they just figured it out. So yeah, it's good information.
Without further ado, let's look at the data. So this data, the graphs you're going to see are essentially, I've taken the data from various places, and it's Scott Fishbowl 13 scoring using stats from 2018 to 2022. But instead of putting player names, I started putting who was like QB1 in place of Josh Allen or Patrick Mahomes for each season. I just did, QB1 down to QB26, RB1 down to RB48, wide receiver 1 down to wide receiver 60, and tight end 1 to tight end 24. And I started making these data position lists because I think it drove a point, and I think Jesse picked up on it really quick, where the elite quarterbacks, the elite tight end, and the volume rushers are where you want to be drafting this year.
Yeah, because you can look at this graph right here and it shows it. Like you see where the wide receivers are at, and even the peak wide receiver, it's below like the tight ends, massively below the running backs, and the quarterbacks is just like a whole nother level. So it does level off at a certain point, right, where they start to match when you get into like the 20s and 30s. But that early edge, like that's where I'm having a hard time like talking myself into wide receiver. Like, yeah, there's Justin Jefferson's great and all, but if you look at his scoring, even like last year's scoring, it doesn't compare to Cooper Kupp. And I think like on a per game basis, like Kupp was like 50th in the scoring when I was looking at individuals like seasons points. And then it's like Justin Jefferson's like 178 in total scoring for like all the positions of the last years. And I was just like, what the heck? I was like, yeah, this scoring definitely shifts how you look at everything. It's just
right. Yeah. So the caveat there was, I don't think it was I think Jefferson was 170th, but I think that was comparing all the players from 2018 to 2022.
Yeah.
But yeah, the wide receiver one, or in total points last year, ranked 170th as a player since 2018. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, it just shows you how it's not beneficial for wide receivers compared to the other positions. So yeah, I would have a very hard time taking like the wide receiver as my first guy. Like I couldn't do it. There's no way.
Yeah, and actually to that point, this next chart is because of Jesse. He gave the idea of grouping them into QB1, RB1s, RB2s, and so on. And it actually is a very eye-opening chart because you can see wide receiver 1 to 12, their average is lower than QB1, RB1, RB2, and QB2. But what's also more interesting is RB1 and RB2 are more than your QB2s.
Yeah, like that's because you get those guys, those cute quarterback twos, where it gets real because you're getting into like the Baker Mayfield tier of quarterbacks, right? Where it's just like it's pretty ugly even with the scoring. So that's where you have the guys pulling it down. And like you can look at the tight end 1, that's 1 through 12. So that's what we mean. Like Kelsey's a massive advantage because that's like the average of them, right? And then you get Kelsey, he's all the way up to like pushing 500 points last year, basically. So he's way up there. And that's where a bit of the strategy comes in. It's like value over replacement, or like war or VORP or whatever it's called. Like that's where, like, why he's getting so pushed up. But yeah, it's quarterback, it's running back, and it's that elite tight end. Like that's, I honestly wouldn't even consider wide receiver in round 1. Like personally, that's just me.
Yeah, I don't think I'm considering a wide receiver until the 3rd round.
Yeah.
But like even like someone like Kirk Cousins or Derek Carr, who was like the QB 11, 12, 13, like I don't know. I'm picking running backs over them day in and day out.
Yeah, I would. So I'll definitely chase a rushing quarterback more with these scoring settings because you're not getting the negatives. So like that's gonna boost up like even Deshaun Watson to a point. Like that'll give him a boost. Or Anthony Richardson's the guy that's gonna go late. That's gonna get steamed up in these settings. But yeah, I'll chase the upside of those rushing quarterbacks in this format than I like last year when I talked about something to Matt Ryan. Case in point, like I'm not gonna do that again this year.
Are you picking Anthony Richardson in the second round?
If I had like the first pick, like one of those early picks, I would be tempted to do it. So depending on how the draft goes, if one of those elite like running backs falls, then I'll take the running back. But with the third round reversal, basically like that means if I don't take quarterback there, I'm missing out on a quarterback until late round 3, and there's going to be a run. So I think that's kind of the dilemma I had if I was the 101, 102, or 103. Like I don't know if I'm able to get a quarterback in the third round, like who that's going to be, right? It's going to get pushed down. I don't really want Derek Carr, like that type of guy as quarterback. I'm more open to Kirk Cousins just because he's been a much better fantasy quarterback like throughout the years. Like he's that mid like QB6 through QB12 usually. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I might actually chase Anthony Richardson at that point, depending on what other quarterbacks or whatever like running backs are available. Like if I got Mark Andrews fall into the second round, like yeah, I'll take Mark Andrews, right? But it's an interesting dilemma, and without looking at the draft board ADP, like that's where it becomes a little bit tricky for me. Like, where would you take Anthony Richardson in these scoring settings?
Yeah, so I've got the 5th spot, and in my draft, and a lot of the strategy discussion revolves around the top 4 quarterbacks being Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, and Lamar Jackson. Like even Burrow and Herbert are 6 and 7 or 5 and 6 in there.
Yeah, they fall down. Yeah,
right. But it's either those 4 quarterbacks or tight end with Kelsey.
Yeah.
So exactly. So my strategy is if it's Kelsey, I'm picking a quarterback in the second round, and I have to go with the upside of Anthony Richardson. Right.
Yeah, like you could. I've seen. So the interesting thing is like you could go Tua in the third round because I've seen him fall, and you're like in the middle where you could grab somebody like that because like he was a beast in the scoring settings last year. So you could go someone like Tua where he's going to give you a lot of points. It just doesn't have the rushing, so that's kind of and you have the concussion situation, which is a whole nother bag of worms. But like, you could go for like an extremely high quarterback too if you wanted to wait in round 3. It's just if you miss out though on those guys, and then you're just like. Yeah. I could theoretically be chasing like QB all year, and that's a terrible position to be with the superflex settings. Like it's terrifying. It literally is terrifying when you're like, all right, cool, just Jacoby Brissett's my quarterback to you, right? It's like, oh, that's the worst. So I think that's the decision you have to make, especially if you take Kelsey. Like you're basically pigeonholing yourself into taking a quarterback in round 2, I think.
Exactly. But also what I've seen is if Kelsey goes top 4, I'm picking Jackson. And pairing Jackson with Richardson in the second, I think that's a upside play because in this huge tournament, you got to take swings. And if your QB2 is Richardson and he does, maybe he starts off slow, but as the season goes on, I realistically think he's going to have a similar season than when Hurts first started, right? Okay. It was a struggle for the first 5-6 weeks, and then they started really getting the scheme around his capability, and the Eagles made the playoffs that year as well. So
yeah, I think if you do take Richardson early, I think you basically have to lock in a solid QB3 just in case, just because of the worst case scenario, right? Because you don't want to be trying to go to the playoffs if like Richardson sucks and he's like a disaster for you, and then you're basically thinking like, well, all right, who's my quarterback 3? It's like Kyle Trask or some nonsense like that. You're like, oh gosh, like this is. So that's a bit where strategy comes in. You basically have to like solidify your team in a way. So, I mean, I'm all aboard the Richardson train. I'm not too worried about it. But if that were the case, like you kind of have to prepare for the worst case scenario too.
Yeah. And honestly, I don't know what I'm going to do when draft day comes. Especially it being a live draft, so there's going to be a lot of curveballs.
Yeah, you guys. The live drafts go a little bit earlier, from if I remember that correctly. So like ADP is not fully set because there's the Spike Week website you can use where they have the ADP, but the live drafts go a little bit earlier, so the ADP is a little bit more wonky, and it makes it more interesting with the live drafts for that because you're like seeing ADP isn't fully set, and then you see bigger like ranges for players. Where I've seen players shift almost 2 rounds in value in certain drafts, like with the ADP. So it's actually a lot of fun with those, where it's like early and kind of unset, in my opinion.
Right. And then, okay, so here's a question, Jesse. If you're building a Scott Fishbowl team this year, how are you building it? When are you taking your QB1? By what round? Absolutely the latest. Your RB1, RB2, tight end 1, and wide receiver 1.
So for quarterbacks, it all depends on how the draft plays out. Like if I'm early, I'm just going to take the quarterback or Kelsey. Like I'm just going to lock in one of those 4. I'm not going to take Burrow along with those guys. Like I'm going to take one of those 4 or Kelsey, or I'm going to like probably shift to running back. Like I'm going to debate that where I go like McCaffrey or, one of those elite guys or Eckler. Like I think Eckler is just going to be a monster with these settings once again. But Jacobs, Henry, those guys are all great. So I could go that strategy. If I'm in the back, which I drafted yesterday, which was really interesting, there was like Deshaun Watson, there was Dak Prescott, there were all these like high-end quarterbacks in the back of the round. And with third round reversal, I knew I was going to get like a really good running back. So basically my strategy was I'm locking in those 2 quarterbacks early, and I'm going to come back. Whoever comes back on the board as my like RB1 in the third round, I'm going to do that. And what happened is Derrick Henry fell to me at 301, and I was like, smash Derrick Henry. And then it came back, and somehow Najee was still on the board and 412. So I was like, cool, lock in another running back. And then because I took Watson, my first pick in the 5th was Amari Cooper. I stacked it because I was like, I want the stack. I could have taken other like wide receivers who I technically have above Cooper, but you want that stack. Like if you can get an elite offense with the stack, it's going to pay off. I think the last year's winner had a lot of Eagles. They had like 3 or 4 Eagles on their team, which made sense. Where they had the Eagles stack. I think they even had Goddard, even though he was hurt. But it was like Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown, Devonta Smith, and I think they had like Kenneth Gainwell or something. Right. But they bought into an offense, and the offense took off. And then that's how you see like you differentiating yourself from these however many drafts we're having. Like there's a ton of drafts, right? So it kind of you have to play it a little bit differently. So for me, the latest I'll probably take a wide receiver is probably around 5 because I don't want to be chasing wide receiver. Like that's my kind of my fail safe. Like I need to take a wide receiver by round 5 because I know there's going to be certain guys going. And if I'm in the back end of the draft, that means it's like not going to circle back to the end of the 6th. And then I'm basically hoping I get like, Rashad Bateman, Elijah Moore, like those type of guys in my wide receiver 1. And that's just terrifying. Like I did this last year and it killed me in the Scott Fishbowl draft. I had freaking like Gabe Davis and like Rashad Bateman as my wide receiver 1 and 2. And I was just like, dude, what the heck did I do? And my team was chasing wide receiver the entire year. It was a nightmare.
Yep.
So you don't want to leave yourself too thin at positions, like which I did last year.
Yeah, that's interesting. Just quick note on the stacking. I think a lot of people that have played Scott Fishbowl in the past have said, stacking necessarily doesn't really help you in the regular season, but it does make you a differentiator when you make it into the big tournament playoff style.
It's 100% that best bowl mindset at the end of the year because you're having these elite, like all these squads are very good at the end of the season, right? So you want that like couple players to pop for you, and if you have them on the same offense where you have that elite quarterback and whichever wide receiver, or if you even go with like a running back who catches passes, right? You get that differentiating offense where you're like, guess what? If my offense pops, like I'm going to be a problem. So like I 100% like I'm on board with that if you get through the playoffs.
Yeah. And I agree with you. You got to have your wide receiver 1 by the 5th round.
Mm-hmm.
And what makes it really hard for me is the value at running back in basically the 3rd, 4th rounds, because a lot of people are chasing that wide receiver 1 in those rounds, right? Even in the 2nd round, they're chasing wide receiver 1s. So it's just popping those running backs down, and I'm eating up all that value right away.
Like I saw like Tony Pollard was in like the 4th round, and I was like, man, I want Pollard so bad, but he didn't fall to me. But like just getting Tony Pollard in the 4th round of a draft is like that's fantastic. So you're getting these guys that's the good thing about running back is it's like there's a top end amount of running backs where it's a pretty high tier of guys, and it's a decent amount of like it's a big area of dudes. It's not just like 1 or 2. You get like 6 through 10 guys that you can choose from realistically. So they're tend to falling because people are like, oh, I want those elite wide receivers, and then they push running back down, and then you're sitting there, and it's like, if you're in like the early part of the draft, it's a little bit different because the way it's going to snake back to you in the late fourth, you'll probably get the last of those running backs. So you basically, if you don't have a running back by the time you get to the fourth, like it's going to be a little bit dicey. And I think that's where draft position comes in, because like there's from the 1 spot or the 12 spot, there's a massive difference. Or if you're in the middle like you are, like you kind of see how you can kind of organize your draft the best, like the most optimal way based on like
right
and stuff.
Exactly. I mean, so that brings up a question. You mentioned your mock from the last spot, and you were able to land an Amari Cooper, who's going to be a wide receiver 1 for the offense at 5'1". But to me, then it's like, all right, I'm going to see 105, 208, 308, and 4.5. And realistically, I'm either going quarterback Kelsey, running back quarterback, running back quarterback. I would be forced to probably pick a wide receiver at the 408. I mean, the 405, right?
Yeah, I probably would. So if you don't get Kelsey, at what point are you taking a tight end? Like, is it if Andrews falls around to you, are you taking him? Because like realistically, you take the quarterback at 105, right?
Oh my!
And it comes out. So if you don't get him,
if I could get Andrews at 208 with Lamar, I would be ecstatic. But I have yet to see him fall in any mocks to 208.
The crazy thing is it's gonna happen in 1 or 2 drafts. Like I saw like the ADP differentiate in some of these drafts. Some people were getting just absolute steals, and I don't know why this happened. Maybe people just hate certain players, but you'll see it. Like somebody's gonna get Lamar 105, then you're gonna get Andrews in the second, and people are gonna be like, "What the heck just happened?" It's gonna happen. So yeah, that'd be like the ideal. Just like, guess what? Hey, guess what? I'm all in on the Ravens offense. Let's go.
Here's the crazy thing. Recently, as of the last 24 hours, I've seen Josh Allen falling to the 105.
Yeah, that's bonkers. He's he's QB1 with these settings. Like I like that's the thing that's jumped out the most to me is like Josh Allen's a freaking cheat code with these settings. So I was like, yeah, QB1, I'm all aboard. I got him at 103 last year. I was so pumped. I was like, yes. Because that's the latest. Like I saw him go for long. Somebody got him at like 108 or something stupid last year, and I was like, come on, man. Like that's just not even fair.
That's not fair at all.
No.
I got sniped Lamar Jackson at 108 last year. Obviously, he got injured, but
yeah, it's just like, yeah, he's so good. He's gonna be a lot of fun. Like that Ravens offense with Monken is like, yeah, like light it up. Let's go. It's gonna be blast.
So that brings us to this next chart, and my apologies, it's very tough to read, and whatnot. But I think this is the most eye-opening chart, and I'm gonna figure out a way to post this somewhere where people can zoom in and zoom out. But what basically you have is that that data of SFB scoring from 2018. I ranked all the players in total points, and then I calculated also the median over all players. And as you can see, you got QB 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the top 4.
Makes sense.
And look at the QB1, and QB1 was Josh Allen for 3 years in a row in this format.
He's a monster, man. He's a freaking monster. It's just not fair. Like you get him, you're like, and the thing is, like, he's gonna go behind Mahomes, and he's likely gonna go behind Hurts. So, like, realistically, 103, you could probably bank on Allen. Like, he's so good, and I'd be like, yep, smash. Like, that's just too good.
Right, and then we've talked RB1. I was surprised to see RB1 that high. I was anticipating tight end Kelsey being that high, but like you said, we are indulging in volume, and that 0.25 per carry boosts those running backs so high.
Yeah, I think Jacobs last year was 30 points per game. If I remember, look, I was surprised how high he got a boost. Like him and Derrick Henry got massive boosts for the carries and stuff. So like he was pushing 30 points per game, which is almost 9 points per game higher than what he averages in a regular. So FYI, like if Jacobs sees that volume again, he's gonna be just a monster. So that's why we're saying the guys that get catches or just a ton of carries, or realistically a combination of both, those RB1 guys, like you want those guys. AKA, I know Najee like has stank all over him, but he's gonna get work. Like you want Najee in this format. Like I don't.
Yeah.
In most leagues, I don't want to touch Najee, but in this format, I'm like, yeah, dude, the carries, like let's roll. Like I'll take his inefficient, but I don't really care.
Yeah, and so Here's an interesting one. Where are you taking Bijan?
So I would, depending on where I was at, if I was in like, so I'm not going to take Bijan super early because I don't know how much work he's going to see. Like I don't think he's going to get like 80 or 90% of the work. Like I don't think he's going to be a super efficient bell cow. He's going to get passing volume, and I think he's going to be really good. So I would be fine taking him in the second somewhere after I get my QB1, but I'm not going to take Bijan on the first or anything like that. Ideally, I think it would be fun to kind of test it out if you're early, like 101 through 103. You get Bijan at like the one or the 210 through 212, right? In that range. And then you have your QB1 and your RB1, and then you see who falls back to you in the third and kind of play that game. You might be able to wait to Bijan in the third. I just don't know where his ADP is setting with these settings, but I get the feeling he's going to go too high. It's just my guess. I imagine he's going to be in that 205 through 201 range. Like people will be like, oh, Bijan smash. And I'll be like, I don't know if I'm comfortable taking him that early. So me, probably late second is without looking at the projections for him. I'd say that's probably the range I'd be comfortable with him.
Yeah, and the reason I bring him up is we know he's the clear RB1 in Dynasty, and Arthur Smith is bottom 3 in passing percentage.
Yeah,
every
like
year.
This is my Drake London and my Kyle Pitts love. Like this puts it into the test once again. It's like
one of the interesting things I've seen is someone did a bully tight end mock with Kelsey at the 105, and then at 308 they took Hawkinson.
Yeah, that's smart.
As their flex, right? If you do land a tight end 2, they're scoring better than your wide receiver 3.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's interesting with these guys because like Hawkinson's like I think he's gonna take a little bit of hit because they have Addison this year and they kind of are going to be fighting over the middle of the field a little bit together. So I don't think he's going to be as good as he was last year, but he'll still be good in this format just with the scoring. So I don't know how I feel about Hawkinson in the third, but it's not bad. Like if you're bullish on Hawkinson, then yeah, like take him in the third, that'd be great. It's just what you're giving up at quarterback. That's what really worries me. If you just pass on quarterback that early, right? It's like you got to hope somebody falls that you're confident with.
Yeah, definitely. But I think there's a tier break between like the first 5 quarterbacks and then the rest of the quarterbacks. So I would be I wouldn't mind going bully tight end in the third. And I know you bring up, Addison, but between Adam Thielen and Dalvin Cook, the vacated targets, I don't think, Hawk sees a dip as much due to Addison as people speculate.
Yeah, I think he was pretty good last year from when he went to Minnesota and basically how they used him. So I still think he's going to be good. I just don't see any more like of a ceiling case because he's going to be fighting. Like I see him fighting for like the second in targets on that team with Addison. Right. So it's kind of going to be they're going to be similar, which means he's not going to be able to differentiate himself. So I don't expect him to be like a true difference maker as I would someone like Andrews or Kelsey. Right? He's in that tier of guys below where it's like Kittle, Goddard, Pitts. Like I love Pitts, but there's the floor is worse with Pitts, right? So those type of guys, and even like I like Freiermuth a lot. So if you get Freiermuth later, he's going really late. Like that one actually interests me because I see him being the wide receiver 2 in Pittsburgh. So like with these settings, I think if you can get Freiermuth, I think he's going probably like round 8 in the settings, which is what he went yesterday, if I remember correctly. Like at that price, I'm like, yeah, dude, like sign me up because he's gonna be good for you. So you can go that route.
Right. Yep, exactly. And two tight ends that are going pretty late, I like are Tyler Higbee and Juwan Johnson.
With the Saints? Yeah.
With the Saints, yep. But as you can see, your wide receiver 5 is barely outscoring your running back 10, which is crazy to think. And how confident are you that outside of Jefferson and Chase and maybe Cup, the others are going to place in the top 5?
Yeah, so the way I look at the truly elite wide receivers, like I would say you have like 6 to 8 guys that are like locked in. I would throw Amon-Ra, I throw AJ Brown in there, I throw CeeDee Lamb, and then you have the olds. So it's like Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp. I know I'm missing one of them, like Stephon Diggs, like the truly elite old guys, right? and then you have Jefferson Chase, so that's like 6, I think, if I did that correctly. But there's that range of guys that I'm fully confident in, where you're like, yeah, they're going to be high end. Outside of that, it gets real questionable, where it's like you could have a lot of guys intermingling. Like, why Amari Cooper could run hot on touchdowns? He could be wide receiver 8, right? Like, you could have something like that happen, where somebody falls out, or Devontae Smith, he just dominates start. So there's just a ton of guys in that back end range where that's why I wouldn't want to take those guys early, because of that, because of the depth
Exactly.
of the position.
Yeah, and I think my strategy is going to be RB, QB, tight end, and then hammer away at wide receiver 2s and running backs.
Yeah, like I
really
see it. There is a threshold wide receiver where he gets real ugly really quick. So you don't just want to punt wide receiver unless you're just like somebody who can predict the future wide receiver. Like, I don't want to go that route. So yeah, you still need to take the good wide receivers. Like, you need to have them, but you can postpone it for a while. It's just once you get to, I think, I'm not sure like with how your mocks have gone, but I've seen like round 8, it gets real questionable at wide receiver, where it's just like, oh no, like what's happening? And this is kind of how actually the draft went last year. It was very similar to that range. Round 7, round 8, you're like, man, if I don't take wide receiver here, it's just going to be a disaster. And yeah, so you have to be very careful with it.
Yeah, and that's mainly, we know that the RB2 on average is scoring better than the wide receiver 1, but you're going to find RB2s in the 7th, 8th, 9th, even 10th rounds.
Yeah, it's just a guy gets hurt. Like, for instance, Ken Walker gets hurt, Zach Charbonnet in like the 12th round, right? He takes over. Boom, you got, and like there's just that situation you can happen anywhere. Elijah Mitchell, San Francisco, there's all these guys that can take over. It's like, be the RB2, no problem.
Yeah, and then you also have running backs that are handcuffs, but they also still have standalone value, like David Montgomery and Devin Singletary, Damian Harris.
Whoever ends up in Dallas is the RB2. Like, whatever guy that's going to be, that guy will have volume. So yeah, exactly. There's a ton of those guys.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, like, if you get 2 RBs in the first 5, then I'm holding back on RBs until like 8th, 9th round.
Yeah. I'd say that's a solid strategy unless like somebody falls like well below their ADP. Like, if you're going to give me a true RB1 like in the 5th, 6th round, I'm like, all right, forget it. Like, I will change my strategy and just like, not play it strictly, just go for ADP.
Yeah, and I think I put the cutoff at Najee Harris as RB1.
Yeah. Like, he's going to be low in RB. And these settings, like, I'm much more confident in him being RB1 than I am in like traditional settings, right? So yeah, like, he's there. Then there's those like borderline guys, like it's like where Dalvin Cook goes to Miami, he'll probably be back in RB1 even though he's not efficient. Or you have Alexander Madison, who could technically fall into like wide receiver 1 usage, or sorry, not running back 1 usage. Like, you have these guys where you're talking about where it's not 100% sure, but there's a chance they could be RB1s.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like I see Dobbins as an RB2 as well, even though I love the Ravens, but I feel like he's just not going to have the volume.
No, the passing volume is just not going to be there for him, unfortunately. But like, he's going to be a high RB2, so he's a solid guy. Like, you have a high floor with him, basically. Yeah,
exactly. So if I do, put my second RB in the first 5 rounds, I'm definitely nabbing Dobbins in the 6th or 5th, late 5th.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a good idea. Like, you'll find those guys who you like, and it's all about take the guys you like. So if you have a guy you're high on and you see a good spot for him, don't let these settings deter you from taking someone. Like, if you find a really good wide receiver, like we're not saying don't take them. If you like the guy, take them. But it's just all about using ADP to your advantage with these settings.
Exactly. And I think the other thing I like to see is stacking. Especially, a lot of people tend to forget that, like, the 107 to 108, they have the potential of stacking Herbert and Eckler. I think that's a sneaky good stack right there.
Yeah, like, we've seen how the Chargers have used their running backs, and mainly just Eckler. But like, the OC coming over for Dallas, like those running backs, even with the pass catchers they had, didn't matter. Like, they were heavily involved. Like, Elliott caught plenty of catches. Tony Pollard's caught plenty of balls. So it's like, they're still going to feature Eckler, and he's one of the best receiving backs in the league. So it's a match made in heaven. Like, if you get that in the second round, you just go, yep, I'm feeling pretty good. Like, and Herbert should be back to what he was 2 years ago, not last year. Like, we're getting rid of that dink and dunk offense that they had last year, which was super frustrating. So he'll be pushing the ball down the field more, and Eckler will be used just fine. Like, I'm fully on board with getting Herbert in the late first, like that range.
Yep. And hopefully by this weekend or early next week, I'm gonna have an article out with this images, and I'll try to figure out the best way so you all can interact with them as much as possible. And shout out to the fantasy industry folks to providing this data that created this charts.
Yeah,
A
it's
huge
awesome.
shout out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Thank you guys.
but that's what the tournament's about, right? It's bringing people that love fantasy football together. So
Yeah.
if you haven't signed up yet, definitely check out scottfistbowl.com.
Yeah. And follow Fantasy Cares on Twitter. They're the ones doing nonstop giveaways. Like if you still want to get in, you should go follow those guys on Twitter. They have nonstop stuff they're doing. And then you could watch their YouTube page. They're giving giveaways on YouTube. So go follow them. Just get involved. It's just a fun experience. Even nobody expects to win, like it's surreal. It's just we're all getting together, having fun, creating bonds over a game we all love to play. And that's really what this is all about.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it's about. You join these massive group chats and you find these bonds that last even when football ends. So
Absolutely.
So
100%.
definitely check it out if you're a fan of the fantasy football game.
For sure.
That we're gonna say goodbye. Hope you like the episode. And we'll be dropping an article, and the links to all the people that provided the data in our description here soon.
So yeah, thanks for coming in, and yeah, have fun for everybody that's getting in Scott Fishbowl this year. Have fun. Good luck to you all, and yeah, thanks for checking out the episode this week.
This podcast is sponsored by The League Winners. Check them out at theleaguewinners.com.